deadly night train. The platform was almost empty when David boarded the midnight train. Rain streaked the windows, and the single dim carriage light flickered like it was struggling to stay awake. He noticed something immediately. No one was talking. A dozen passengers sat perfectly still, their heads bowed as if asleep or in prayer. The silence was heavy, the kind that makes your ears ring. The conductor appeared at the end of the carriage. His uniform looked decades old, the brass buttons tarnished. When he passed David's seat, he bent slightly and whispered, "Don't look at them when the lights go out." David tried to ask what he meant, but the conductor was already moving on, his shoes clicking softly against the floor. The train rattled into the dark countryside. The glass reflected David's pale face, but not the passengers behind him. He told himself it was a trick of the light. Then, halfway through a tunnel, the lights died. At first, only the rumble of the train and David's heartbeat filled the air. But then, a slow scraping sound, like fingernails dragging along metal. It was coming from every direction. A cold breath brushed his ear. When the lights flickered back on, the passengers were no longer sitting. They were standing, all of them, facing him. Their heads were still tilted down, but their skin was pale and stretched tight, as if something inside was pressing to get out. One of them, a woman in a torn blue dress, lifted her head. Her eyes were empty sockets, her jaw unhinged wider than it should have been. The lights snapped off again. Something ice-cold closed around David's wrist. A voice, in a chorus of whispers, said, "You looked." David woke to the sound of metal breathing. It wasn't possible, but the whole carriage seemed to inhale and exhale like a giant animal. The air smelled of wet earth and rust. When the lights came on, it wasn't the train he remembered. The seats were now twisted wooden benches. The walls were lined with black, pulsing veins that throbbed like they had a heartbeat. There were no windows, only darkness pressing against the walls from outside. The passengers were gone, but the shapes remained. Human silhouettes were fused into the walls, faces stretched in silent screams, fingers clawing at the surface as if they'd been trapped mid-escape. A shadow fell across him. The conductor was there, but his skin was paper-thin, his teeth too long, his eyes shining like wet stones. "You weren't supposed to see them," he said, voice scraping like sandpaper. "Now you ride their line." The train shuddered, picking up speed. David staggered toward the door, but when he yanked it open, there was no platform, no tracks, just a swirling black void. The wind howled with voices, hundreds of them crying and begging in every language. One cold hand pushed him back inside. "Midnight to nowhere," the conductor murmured. "We don't stop until you're part of the wall." The last thing David saw before the lights went out again was the empty seat across from him. The cushions sank slightly, as if someone unseen had just sat down. Somewhere in the dark, the voices began to whisper his name. The train was found the next morning, parked neatly at the end of the line. No driver, no passengers, just one seat with deep scratches in the metal where someone had tried to hold on.